programming together here and some deeper conversations with some pals now that summer's here, and we're kind of into the pennant race, and certainly the Olympics now in the books for the most part. And, I thought it'd be a good time to bring Chris Pica back onto the program. And, Chris, I reached to you, and I said, hey, let's do some radio in a couple days. You're like, yeah, sure. And I said, what are we going to talk about? Because you always sort of green room me in that way. And I think I text you back something like, I'm sure someone will do something stupid to give us something to talk about in the sports space. And lo and behold, Ryan Lochte just, rolls right on in for us. Right, Chris?
Yeah, that was... I don't know if I would have picked him. I figured it would have been some NFL player or something like that. I don't think I would have picked a U.S. swimmer to do that, but he certainly fits that bill.
Yeah. All right. You've done a lot of PR. I mean, first off, background, Chris is my friend, my first media friend. I met him when I walked into the Baltimore News-American in January of 1984 on the eve of the 84 Olympics. You may have been literally at my side, and I think you were, when I got my first ever byline. It was August 1st of 1984. I had my first byline. It was an Olympic-related story. It was on Teresa Andrews. You may have been the guy who said to me, you were Tom Robinson, call over to the North Baltimore Aquatic Swim Club and get a quote from Murray Stevens, right? So I go back with the Olympics to how I felt about it in '84 to where we are now, and I've known you all these years. You've worked in baseball, you've worked in football, you've worked in PR. Just when, you hear the O.J. Simpson story 30 years ago and your jaw drops, and you these crazy stories and all the steroid stories and the cheating stories and scandal, this one's, I don't want to say it's an all-timer, but it's truly an international incident born of absolute drunkenness, stupidity, cover-up where there didn't need to be. It's really an embarrassment. I don't know. If you're the PR guy on the Olympic Committee, tell everybody how this thing works when everybody's trying to CYA, right?
Yeah, and to give you a little bit more background, I was honored to work at two international events when TBS had the Goodwill Games.
Sure.
Back in the 90s. I worked boxing and team handball in Seattle in 1990, and then I did beach volleyball in 1998.
Lucky you.
And you're around all these tremendous, international athletes in their different disciplines, and it's a completely different monster when you're working an event like that as opposed to, let's say, a Super Bowl or other events of that size, just because of the amount of international media you have. It's not just 100 U.S. people in a press box. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of journalists, and in this case, in the Olympics, thousands.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Lochte made himself the biggest story in the world, right? Literally, right? I mean,
right.
And that's hard to do.
Well, that's hard to do, and I can only imagine, much like the phone call that the NFL PR guy gets at 2 in the morning or 4 in the morning, one of his guys gets busted for something or gets locked up. I'm sure that first call went to the U.S. swimming PR director, who immediately called the USOC. And then you've got to worry about the U.S. consulate because you're not in the country, and it's something that we talk to our student athletes at the Popeyes Bahamas Bowl about, that you're not in the United States. This is not U.S. laws do not apply. You are at the mercy of the local laws that are in place.
And respect those laws. That's not a difficult concept.
And there are subtle differences and there are major differences, and so.
But one of them in general is everyone in the world knows. But if you and I get stuck up at 4:00 in the morning at a gas station in Rio, Chris, it's probably our fault. I mean, you've traveled around the world. I've traveled around the world. We know what this is. You know the situation. It's not favorable in any light to be out at 4:00 in the morning in Rio, right?
No, it's I think it goes back to the Tony Dungy line. Nothing good ever happens after midnight, generally.
Yeah, well, it's just a bad decision. Sure. I mean, you've seen athletes make these decisions all the time.
It's a bad decision that got exponentially worse because for whatever reason, and again, I'm a big proponent of letting stories breathe, and what we knew in the first 12 hours of this story was not what we knew after 48 or 3 days or 4 days. This stuff just needs time to sort of hash out. No less than the Daily Mail in Britain had gotten a hold of video of those guys coming back to the Olympic Village after 7 in the morning. They'd gotten a hold of security footage. Obviously, the footage was released from the gas station involved. So there were all these nuances that were going on. But the only thing that anyone knew for the first 12 hours was that 4 of our Olympic athletes had been held up at a gas station in Rio. No one was hurt except that they had lost their wallets and some money. And that was the story, and that was what got out, and that was shocking. And, of course, Rio had been sort of a punching bag for the last several months with the water problems, with the high crime problems in the favelas, all of the stuff that was going on.
Well, how about the deposed president, too? That would be part of it as well, right?
They have money problems. You're doing a major event there. HBO did a fairly large piece on the International Olympic Committee and how they choose Olympic cities. A lot of it's completely different. We'll get into that a little bit later. But Rio basically had been a punching bag prior to the games beginning. And so this incident, whatever it was at the time, thought to be something else, played into that narrative of Rio as an unsafe city. You know, these are our Olympic hero, one Olympic hero, and other guys that participate on the team. This happens. So this suddenly just blows up beyond compare. And you don't tell the truth from the get-go to your mom or to anybody else for whatever reason that is. And you know, only Ryan Lochte knows why he chose to tell the story that he told. And again, there's still some nuance to what happened at the station, too, as this story sort of broadens out. But ultimately, you know, you force the USOC, who has enough to do, and they have a program that I interviewed with the USOC several years ago, and they talked about a program that they do at each games called Managing Victory. As soon as, you know, people medal in their particular sports, the next day they're taken around to NBC. They do the rounds. They do the car wash, NBC, their local media that's in Rio, national media that talk to them. And
that's
so
the one day of their life someone's going to want to talk to them for a day, and then they have to go home and either go get another gold medal or have a parade in their hometown or go get a real job if you're a discus thrower or something that doesn't really translate into the real world, or onto a Wheaties box, right? I mean, you know, other than these couple of girls that, you know, on the balance beam and a couple of the swimmers, you know, there's, you know, another 90, 100 people that medal there, not named Carmelo Anthony, right?
Right, and they're extremely important, as well as, let's say, whoever finishes 8th in the race with Usain Bolt in the 100-meter dash. He got to an Olympic final, you know, and those athletes are important too. So the USOC that desperately wants to make sure that these people get the publicity for what they do and how hard they've worked, in some cases, for decades.
Right, and the 5 minutes to water polo is important, right? Yeah, sure.
Yep, it is, and it is for them. And so suddenly the story is not the medalist. It's not the success of the games so far, for the most part, and there have been problems there, but the actual games themselves, the actual competitions, have been their usual Olympic selves, tremendous competition, great moments, and the like. And the USOC and U.S. Swimming, you had a great meet with Katie Ledecky and Michael Phelps and everyone else that medaled. Now they're having to take care of something that's didn't happen in the pool. Didn't happen on the competition court. This is something that they're having to deal with.
This is real life. The police are involved, right? The federales are coming in. You got all that going on, right?
That's exactly right. You've got lawyers. You've got U.S. consulate, U.S. embassy. You've got all that going on instead of worrying about, you know, publicizing your medalists and publicizing your Olympians, and it's taking time away from that. And that's unfair, quite honestly, to the athletes that have worked really hard to get to this point, that maybe they receive a little bit less attention because of this. And it just sort of spiraled out of control because some lies were told, some, things were kind of, expanded probably beyond what actually happened. And it hurts everyone. And it's not a good look for the United States Olympic Committee. It's not a good look for U.S. Swimming. It's certainly not a good look for Ryan Lochte and the other swimmers involved. And it's a tough situation PR-wise to manage. And because you're probably saying, hey, you've got to come clean with this. And of course, Lochte's lawyer probably crafted the statement that came out late last week with Ryan basically, I'll say apologizing, but he left out a few key apologies, which was basically to his teammates who he threw under the bus and who were left back in Rio and pulled off of a plane as opposed to going home, to the people of Rio for what happened, and for any vandalism that occurred. So it was sort of a kind of an apology, but really wasn't. So you've got all these competing things that are going on, and this is just taking a lot more time and a lot more energy than I think any of the parties would have preferred to expend on it.
Chris Pica is our guest, longtime worker in the public relations and the communication space in the National Football League and the Saints, Atlanta Falcons, and, of course, a Mount St. Joe Gale and a Loyola Greyhound locally as well. I want to talk about this with you because you've been around professional athletes, and, you were with Michael Jordan famously with the Birmingham Barons, who, had his own issues in dealing with fame and the loss of his father and the murder, the dark side of fame, I should say. And I think all of us, I was a kid growing up over in Colgate, dreaming of the stars and being around the stars and, being Howard Cosell or Oscar Madison or something like that one day myself. I've done this for a living and been around all this for a while, and I've seen certainly the dark side of all of it. But these swimmers are fascinating to me because I am no fan of Michael Phelps. I'm just, flat out. It was 2 miles from my radio station for 20 years, and we've never had him on. I've never been near him. Everyone I've ever dealt with around him has been difficult or sort of, I would use the word douchey. That would be the nice way of just saying nobody was sort of real. It was all these layers of agents and this and that, and I would always come back to this. We would always come back to this with Ray Bachman and everyone else. We'd say, he swims. If he doesn't want to come on the show, if he doesn't want to come on and talk about loving the Ravens, if he doesn't want to be, that guy, okay, we'll just go talk to Ravens players, or I'll get Brian Billick on the show, or I don't want to have anybody on my radio show that doesn't want to be on my radio show, but a peculiar bird for sure, and then all of the out-of-the-pool issues in and around his fame, his wealth, his largesse, his place in East Baltimore, and the legend of Michael Phelps and the nightlife in Baltimore, and then the drinking and driving. It seems like every time he would get out of the pool, he win a gold medal, and he's back in the news for doing bong hits at South Carolina or whatever, right? So, I start to get to the point after all of this and say, it's very rare that there are guys like Joe Flacco that come through this thing and can come out the other side of it, and he's not on the other side of it. We would have said that about Ray Rice, too, by the way. But it's very rare that people get through this thing with some sort of normalcy. I always watched how Brooks Robinson conducted himself and just thought, why can't everybody just be sort of normal like Brooks, right? But it doesn't. In the modern era, it's not normal. And the fame thing, and I know you know this from being around football players, athletes, some guys take it differently than other guys. And I think the football players, even if they don't handle it well, it's in their face all the time if they play at Clemson or Alabama, or if they're in the NFL for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, and they've seen the guy down the locker get arrested for this or that or whatever the situation would be. But these swimmers, they just go away, and it's very obvious that they spend an inordinate amount of their lives and their childhood. I've compared it over the last week, Chris, to child actors and the problems that child actors would have adjusting to life and real life in the grocery store when you become famous and you're Michael Phelps and you've got all this money and you weren't really good at handling people when you were 15. Then by the time you're 19, you're a bajillionaire and you're kind of an arrogant jerk. And Lochte is one who has always been overshadowed by Phelps, right? So the psychology of this in wanting to make a news story where there was none and then lying about it and still 10 days later being the biggest story in the world, there's something probably really Donald Trumpian perverse about just wanting, or George Steinbrenner just wanting to be the headline. I mean, it's weird because more people have talked about Ryan Lochte than, he just would have been another guy had he not done this. Now he's infamous, right? Which is the next best thing to being famous if you want to be famous, right?
Yeah, and the cycle's going to go away. By the time the Olympics, are faded from people's memories in a few weeks, it's going to be sort of a national joke. But Lochte goes back to sort of relative anonymity as a swimmer. I know he wants to make a run at 2020 in Tokyo.
And then
who
what
knows
happens
they'll
to
do.
his life, I guess, is my point. When all
Yeah.
you've done is swim, my cousin would say that about tennis. I mean, she got on scholarship at Arizona and played, and the minute she had her last match, she put the tennis racket. I don't think she's picked the tennis racket up in 15 years because she said it's just like it's what I did to get an education, and I liked it, and it blew my hip out and hurt like hell. And then there just comes a point where like, I don't want to do that anymore because it's all I did all day. I want to go live. I want to go to the beach. I want to do all the other stuff that the kids in Southern California were doing.
Well, in the case of Lochte or Phelps, I mean, you've got some options. Because you've made money from endorsement. You could potentially coach. I mean, if you're designed to coach or something you want to do, maybe that's something they do. I'm sure that NBC 4 years from now, if Ryan Lochte and/or Michael Phelps made themselves available, as much as they love Rowdy Gaines and they love him as a swimming analyst, I'm sure they wouldn't mind having either or both of those guys in the booth with them, even part of the Olympics.
Well, Lochte's not that guy anymore, right? Lochte kind of sort of cost him.
Well, but see, that kind of publicity of having him in there is people will tune in to watch him. To see
there's
how
always a second act, right? It's America, right?
It's right. It's everybody gets a second act, and he's just this big sort of. He's an overgrown, and I hate to use the term just because I think there are some negative connotations to it. But he's more of a lax bro. We used to call some lacrosse guys that sort of acted that way. That was basically a frat guy, and that's really what Ryan Lochte is. He's an overgrown frat boy in a lot of ways, and hasn't changed. So
I called it douchey. I think that's a fine non-FCC, and if you're offended by douchey, well, then you've never met one.
Yeah,
so.
Listen. I'm not going to disagree with that term, but these guys are going to go back, and if they've been smart with their money, if they've been smart with their public appearances, or if they're doing swimming competitions or other places where they get appearance fees and all that. I mean, if they've managed their money well, they'll be okay. But they've lived. As you mentioned, and I think any of us have worked in sports understand this. There's a bubble in sports, and the size of the bubble depends on how high up on the food chain you are. Guys like Michael Jordan were at the highest part of the food chain, so the bubble was extremely big. Now that bubble's smaller for Michael as an owner in Charlotte, but that bubble's still there. That bubble will always be there for Michael Phelps, and unfortunately, he had to grow up in full view of the world. And
yeah, I mean, Cal Ripken gets divorced. It's news that day, and it's not good news. You know what I mean? And their real lives have to play out where they're not batting 4 or 5 times every night, or hitting jumpers, or swimming for medals. And the psychology of it, I guess it's a box of chocolates, right? Some people are very well adjusted to it. I'm sure if I said to you, name the top 10 people you've ever met in sports, you would give me 10 really well adjusted, really sort of cool. I ran into Trevor Price the other night. Wonderful wife. She's an attorney. I mean, kids are here. They live. You find these athletes that seem to be doing okay afterward and like living a intelligent, sane sort of, and then you hear the other down in luck, and a lot of times you look at it and say a lot of it really is about how they came into it and how they reacted to all of their career, and were they doing the right things during all of that. Clearly Ryan Lochte was out getting hammered, making an ass of himself at 4:30 in the morning in Rio anyway. That unto itself, it's a pox on the U.S. House, quite frankly. It's an embarrassment. It was like the hockey team a couple. Remember the U.S. hockey team ripped
I remember
up?
That.
Oh my God, it was a disgrace. International
and a
disgrace.
And a lot of times these guys, especially these single sport athletes, and in some cases football players too, they've got a group of people around them that sort of clean up the messes and make sure the stuff doesn't get to the media.
But in the modern era with the social media, it's different now. I mean, Phelps found that out when he was doing the bong hit, which that's going on throughout the country. That's going on in Colorado. It's going on throughout the NFL. But he got through that. He got through the next year, and now he's back on top of the world. You have a second act. Hell, Phelps has had 4 acts, right?
Yep, and potentially, and I'm not convinced he doesn't try again in 2020, even in a limited program. I think the lure of the pool and the lure of doing what he's
what else is he going to do? I guess that's my point with this. What else are these guys going to do? And we found out, when Phelps has gotten bored, right? he's gotten into trouble. I mean, and you know that from the athlete side as much as anything. The more these coaches can keep these guys around, the less trouble they can get into because they're focused on something productive instead of something. And I thought Andrew Brandt wrote a great piece at the MMQB about Trent Richardson. I don't know if you caught that or not. If you haven't, go out and Google it. Just about, guys, idle time when all you've done is swim. You get out of the pool. What do you do with yourself, right?
Yeah, and I'm hoping, and again, the narratives are too easy. You know, these guys are swimmers and heroes, and they're medalists for their country. They become these Olympic heroes. But just like anybody else,
I got a hero. We're going to Germany in 2 weeks. Guy saved my wife's life. That's a hero.
That is a hero. But I'm saying in terms of the narrative. And so you forget, or people forget, that these guys have real lives, real problems, real situations that they're dealing with just like everyone else
And
does.
they don't deal with those problems the same way they deal with swimming fast.
That's right.
What they do is swim fast. We sometimes we lose sight of that when we wrap red, white, and blue around it. Mommy's crying. They swim fast. Any other expectation put upon them is something that they've either gravitated toward in society because they're grown-ass men, or it's something that they've never had to have been subjected to because, as you said, somebody's always been there to be a pillow for that.
That's right, and hopefully, and that with his fiance and Boomer's little baby, that Michael finds what it will take to fulfill him once the cheering is stopped, once the medals will stop being awarded. And that's no different than an NFL player being called to an office on a Tuesday in week 6 has said, you're done. We appreciate what you're doing, but we're moving on, and you're cut, and your career's over, basically.
Yeah, nobody likes to cut themselves, right?
Right. No one will cut themselves, but eventually that time's going to come for all of them. And so, what happens when the cheering stops? What's the next move? What have you done? And that's the one thing we don't know. What have some of these guys done in their off time to prepare themselves beyond their sport, beyond their time in the limelight, and how do you best leverage that? Phelps could very well become a long-term spokesman for Under Armour, a corporate spokesman. Will probably make a lot of money doing speeches across the country for the next couple of years. If he plays it right, he could make himself a really good living just doing that if he wanted to, and make appearances at swimming meets and work with kids, which I think he genuinely enjoys doing. I think it's the one genuine thing that Michael Phelps always seemed to be is he's always genuine around kids and children. Adults, not so much from everything I've read and heard, but around kids, he's been great. And I think you can find ways of doing that, plus do speeches and some of the other things that capitalize on his fame, but also maybe give a message of, hey, I had to grow up. This is the stuff I did. I was dumb. And this is what I needed to do in order to grow up and be a better human. And I think that's a message that can resonate with a lot of people. And so maybe that's what he does. A lot of former athletes have gone down that road. But
we'll turn the Ryan Lochte thing into a teaching moment, right, Chris?
Yeah, and it is. And the question is, will Ryan Lochte learn those lessons, because he hasn't really shown that he's not anything more than a party guy outside of the pool, and at some point the party has to end, and you're no longer an Olympian or longer Olympian medalist. And what do you do from there? So, for him, especially throwing his boys under the bus and doing the stuff that came of this, it's a difficult situation, but one that I'm sure he and his lawyer and USOC and others are going to try to figure out how best to position this and try to move on as quickly as possible as we go on to the next scandal or the next situation or the next thing that comes up that gets everybody up in arms.
Chris Pica, one of our media analysts here, and taking a look at the Ryan Lochte and the Olympic situation. Chris, I'll tell you what, man, we'll talk more about NFL preseason and MLB attendance and more Olympic stuff at another time down the line. But hang in there this summer. I know you're trying to beat that Georgia Heat down there, and we'll be getting together at some point here. I'll ship you some crab cakes or something if you don't get up here, man.
That sounds great, Nestor. I appreciate it and always appreciate the time.
You are Blog and Tackle out on Twitter. He is Chris Pike, our longtime friend, WNST contributor, talking all things Olympics and Lochte, amongst other things. I can be reached, Nasty, at WNST.net 24 hours a day from anywhere. Complaints, criticism. I prefer praise. Thank you very much. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook Live, and our WNSTV YouTube channel, as well as our morning newspaper, which is all brought to you by Planet Fitness and planetfitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Very easy to do. Also, any breaking news happens first on the WNST text service. You'll get that first from Luke, and it's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. All right. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.